Don't insult this building by calling it honesty, Adrian Kessler said, and his voice sliced through the marble lobby so sharply that even the revolving doors seemed to stop breathing. A man in your position does not return a phone like that without first checking what it can buy. Silence fell the way cold rain falls over glass, sudden, thin, merciless. Heads turned, heels paused on polished stone. The last clusters of black-tie donors, still fragrant with expensive perfume and old applause, stood beneath the chandelier and watched a maintenance worker in a damp blue uniform hold out a phone he had not tried to unlock. In one hand, the device gleamed like a piece of another world. In the other, his fingers shook from exhaustion, not guilt. Daniel Reyes did not lower his eyes. He stood near the brass security desk with rainwater darkening his sleeves and bleach still caught in the fine cracks of his knuckles. His shoulders were broad from labor, but tired in a way that made him seem older than 36. Behind him, curled on a lobby bench with her backpack against her chest, his daughter Lily slept through the humiliation in her school shoes, her hair fallen across her cheek, one small paper heart taped crookedly to the side of her lunchbox. She had cut it from a spelling worksheet that morning and written in pencil, "For brave pockets." Outside, the night had become a city of mirrors. Rain stitched silver lines down the tower windows. Taxi lights smeared across the avenue. The air coming in each time the doors turned smelled of wet pavement, diesel, and the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts from a vendor who had already packed up and gone home. Inside, the lobby smelled of wax, lilies, wool coats, and money. Daniel had spent 11 hours polishing the evidence of other people's importance. He had buffed bronze elevator trims until they reflected faces that never looked back at him. He had wiped lipstick from crystal glasses after a charity gala titled Vision for Tomorrow, a night devoted to speeches about compassion delivered over plates no one finished. His second job started in less than an hour across town, shelving boxes at a grocery warehouse until dawn. Between the two paychecks, if both arrived on time, he could usually keep the lights on. Usually. That week, usually had broken. The pharmacy had called that morning about Lily's inhaler refill. The landlord had taped a yellow notice to the apartment door. The school had sent home a reminder about the overdue fee for Lily's field trip to the Science Museum. And Lily, with the solemn bravery children borrow when they are already learning disappointment, had said it was all right if she missed it. Daniel had promised her she would not miss it. He had promised her soup from the diner after his shift, too, because the rain had made her cough, because the apartment radiator had gone cold again, because promises were the only luxuries he still knew how to give like they were certain. He had once made promises with someone beside him. His wife, Elena, had been the kind of woman who folded grocery bags neatly for reuse and laughed with her whole face. She had died 19 months earlier in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and overworked air conditioning after an infection that turned cruel faster than the insurance paperwork moved. Since then, grief had not behaved like a storm. It had behaved like weather. It lived in the walls, in the sink full of 2 bowls instead of 3, in the quiet after Lily fell asleep. In every moment, Daniel reached for a future and found only another bill. He carried all of it the way he carried mops, grocery cartons, sleeping children, carefully, without complaint, because dropping any of it would still leave it his. The phone in his hand was impossibly sleek, black glass bordered in gold, the sort of thing that could pay a month's rent if sold to the right man in the wrong alley. He had found it 15 minutes earlier near the curb outside the tower, half hidden beside a storm drain where rainwater had begun to pool around it. He had almost stepped on it while hurrying Lily beneath the overhang to keep her dry. Near the curb, a woman in a plain camel coat had been searching the pavement with the restrained panic of someone trying not to let the world see her unravel. A driver had snapped that he couldn't wait forever. A doorman, distracted by wealth he recognized more easily than distress, had barely looked at her. "It's only a phone," one gala guest had murmured as she passed. But it had not been only a phone. Daniel had known that the instant he saw the woman's face. Not because it looked rich, but because it looked scared. He had picked the device up face down. Lily, standing under his arm, with rain dripping from the end of her braid, had whispered, "Daddy, should we see whose it is?" "No," he had said softly, already moving. "If something is lost, we return it. We don't open the rest of someone's life." So he had run. He had run with his work boots slapping the wet sidewalk, and Lily clutching his hand, past idling cars and umbrellas that turned away from him, calling out, "Ma'am! Ma'am!" until the woman stopped near the crosswalk and turned back under the streetlight. Rain had silvered the strands of hair at her temple. She looked tired, expensive, and strangely alone. "I think this is yours," Daniel had said, holding it out. For one suspended second, relief had changed her face so completely it made her look almost young. She took the phone with both hands, as if it were more fragile than glass. "Did you—" she swallowed. "Did you look?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Lily had answered before he could. "Because my daddy says private things still belong to people when they're lost." The woman's eyes had gone to Lily then, to the paper heart on the lunchbox, to the damp hem of Daniel's uniform, and something unreadable had passed over her expression. Gratitude, yes, but also shame. Not the cheap kind that flares and disappears, the deeper kind. The kind born when a person suddenly sees the full price of another person's decency. Then a black car had swept to the curb, and everything changed. Adrian Kessler had emerged first, immaculate even in the rain, his charcoal coat untouched by weather, his cufflinks catching light as he strode toward them with 2 security men behind him. His face had the smooth confidence of a man who treated human beings as risks to be managed or narratives to be polished. He knew cameras before he knew pain. He recognized status the way predators recognize movement. "Miss Vale," he had said tightly to the woman, and that was the first moment Daniel understood the stranger in the plain coat was not simply wealthy.
She was Helena Vale, founder and chief executive of Vale Meridian Holdings. Billionaire, builder of hospitals, towers, foundations, headlines. The woman whose face hung in the lobby in black and white photographs beside words like innovation and vision. Daniel had only ever seen her from a distance in framed pictures, always composed, always luminous, always surrounded by the architecture of command. But here, in the rain, with her coat wet at the shoulders and relief still trembling in her hand, she looked less like a monument and more like a woman who had briefly been afraid. Adrian's gaze dropped to the phone, then to Daniel, then sharpened. "Where did he get that?" Daniel began to answer, but Adrian was already stepping into the scene like a blade entering cloth. "We have procedures for this," he said. "Employees do not intercept executives outside secured channels. There are liability issues, optics." Helena looked at Daniel. "He returned it." "Yes," Adrian said, too quickly. "And perhaps after exploring it, we can't be naive." Daniel felt Lily wake on the edge of the moment and blink up at the grown-up cold around her. "I found it by the drain," he said. "I just brought it back." Adrian gave a humorless smile. "Of course you did." He said it in the tone some people reserve for miracles they intend to cancel. Now, beneath the chandelier, with the lobby full of witnesses and the story already curdling in public, Adrian had repeated his accusation, louder, cleaner, harsher. He spoke not to discover truth, but to establish hierarchy. Men like you. That was the phrase that stayed in the air. Not a question, a sentence. Daniel heard one donor exhale through her nose. He heard someone's bracelet click against a champagne flute. He heard Lily shift on the bench and sit up, small and confused, her hand going instinctively to the paper heart on her lunchbox. Helena Vale stood a few feet away, the recovered phone now resting against her palm. "Enough," she said quietly. But Adrian was a man accustomed to mistaking quiet for permission. "With respect," he replied, "this is exactly how breaches happen. One sentimental mistake becomes a headline. We have to think about image, about precedent, about what people will assume if—" Daniel's jaw tightened. He was tired enough to be reckless and proud enough not to beg. "I didn't ask for anything," he said. Adrian turned to him with polished contempt. "That doesn't make you noble." "No," Daniel said. "It just makes me done standing here." He went to lift Lily's backpack from the bench. She was fully awake now, her eyes moving between the adults, with the alert, hurt children wear when they realize dignity has entered the room and been treated badly. Daniel took her hand. He intended to leave with nothing except the part of himself no one had managed to buy. Then Helena spoke again. "Wait." The single word was not loud, but the room obeyed it. She stepped toward Daniel and Lily, no longer performing wealth, simply carrying it. Up close, there were shadows beneath her eyes that makeup magazines never photographed. Her hand closed around the phone once, almost unconsciously. "Did you miss your ride because of this?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. There was no clean answer to humiliation. "We missed the bus." Adrian cut in. "We can expense a car and conclude this." But Lily, still honest in the ruthless way only children can be, looked up at Daniel and whispered, not quietly enough, "Daddy, is this the money for my medicine?" Because Daniel had already reached into his pocket for the folded bills that were supposed to cover the late-night ride home now that the bus was gone. The inhaler refill, the diner soup, the field trip envelope. Everything in life had begun to share the same pocket. The lobby heard it. Money did not usually become visible in rooms like that, unless it was being donated. Helena looked at the crumpled bills in Daniel's hand, then at Lily's pale face, then at the little paper heart half peeling from the lunchbox. Some part of her expression changed again, deeper this time, as if a locked door had quietly opened inside her. "I'll have my driver take you home," she said. Daniel's answer came from that old, wounded place where pride protects pain from being inspected. "That isn't necessary." "It is," Helena said. "Tonight, it is." He almost refused anyway. Not because he did not need help, but because need had humiliated him enough for one evening. Yet Lily was coughing into her sleeve, and he could feel the cold in her fingers. So he nodded once. Not gratitude, not surrender, just reality. The ride home cost him something after all. Not his money, but his certainty that decency could pass unnoticed. By morning, the city had chewed the story into something uglier. A 32-second video clip, recorded by a donor near the security desk and posted without context, showed Adrian's accusation, Daniel's wet uniform, Helena's phone in his hand. The caption was sharp enough to travel. Maintenance worker caught with CEO's lost phone at gala. Questions remain. By noon, strangers were speaking about Daniel's face as if it belonged to a moral fable they were entitled to finish themselves. Some called him a thief. Some called him opportunistic. Some called him proof that kindness was just a costume poor people wore when rich people were watching. The tower suspended him pending internal review. Pending internal review meant no paycheck Friday. Pending internal review meant his badge disabled at 6:14 a.m. Pending internal review meant the warehouse manager, having seen the clip, told him not to come in until things were cleared up. It meant the landlord's yellow notice remained on the door while Lily sat at the table, coloring quietly around her cough and pretending not to hear him on the phone, asking for more time. Public shame is a strange violence. It enters the home without knocking. It sits at the kitchen table. It makes children study the faces of adults more carefully. Lily did not ask if her father had done anything wrong. That was the most painful part. She simply asked, "Are we still good people?" Daniel had turned away then, under the pretense of rinsing a cup. Because grief was one thing, but having to answer for the world's cruelty in front of your child was another. "Yes," he said finally. "Even when people are loud about the wrong thing, we stay who we are." Lily considered that with solemn care. Then she peeled the paper heart off her lunchbox, smoothed it, and tucked it into the chest pocket of his work shirt. "For brave pockets," she reminded him. He nodded, because it was all he could do. Across the city, Helena Vale sat in a conference room with walls of glass and listened to men discuss exposure, optics, and messaging. Adrian Kessler spoke the most. He recommended a formal statement emphasizing zero tolerance around executive privacy. He advised silence regarding the worker until legal reviewed the matter. He suggested swift containment before investors began asking whether confidential materials on Helena's recovered phone had been compromised. He was very practiced at sounding reasonable. Helena let him speak. On the surface, she was listening about a phone. Underneath, she was listening to everything else, because the truth Adrian did not know she already possessed was this. She had not spent months suspicious of random workers. She had spent months suspicious of him. 3 anonymous letters had reached her private office that spring. Letters from employees describing medical aid requests denied without explanation. Late-shift parents punished for choosing children over appearances. A culture where image flowed downward like law and mercy was treated as inefficiency. Helena had begun coming and going without full escort, without public announcement, wearing ordinary coats, listening. She had built an empire. She was starting to fear the empire had built its own cruelty inside her name. And the phone Daniel returned had contained more than numbers. It held an unsent audio message Helena had recorded at 1:07 that morning, to the younger brother she had not spoken to in years. A message she was not yet brave enough to send. It held a scanned copy of a handwritten recipe card from her mother, now dead. It held, too, confidential board documents rejecting Adrian's proposed cuts to employee hardship support. If Daniel had opened it, he could have found leverage. If he had sold it, headlines would have burned for weeks. He had not looked. In a world trained to monetize every accident, a stranger had protected not only her power, but her privacy, her grief. The unmarketable part. That mattered more than Adrian understood, and perhaps more than Helena had expected it to. She ordered a full forensic audit. Adrian smiled and agreed, which was the first sign of fear. 2 days later, The truth began to rise from the quiet places where arrogance forgets to look. Security footage from the west curb showed Daniel picking the phone up and turning it immediately face down. Another camera caught him running after Helena through the rain with Lily beside him, the child nearly losing a shoe in a puddle. Access logs showed no attempt to unlock the device. Remote sync records, however, revealed multiple unauthorized backup extractions from Helena's executive cloud in the previous month. Credentials routed through Adrian's assistant, then wiped, then rerouted again. Old aid requests surfaced too, buried in a queue he controlled. One of them carried a familiar name, Elena Reyes, an emergency assistance appeal filed 11 months earlier when Daniel had fallen behind on hospital debt and childcare after his wife's death. Denied without escalation. Reason marked, insufficient strategic visibility. Helena stared at the phrase until it blurred. A man had polished her building at night while burying his wife's bills, and the system carrying her surname had measured his suffering against optics. The town hall was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Employees filled the auditorium. Executives lined the front row. The press, alerted at the last minute, stood along the back wall with cameras ready. Adrian arrived composed, though his collar sat a fraction too tight. Daniel came because he had been told his presence was requested. He wore the cleanest shirt he owned, borrowed a jacket from a neighbor, and almost did not walk in when he saw how large the room was. Lily sat beside him holding his hand, the paper heart visible in the clear pocket of her lunchbox, as if courage itself had shown up in second-hand shoes. Helena stepped to the podium without notes. The room settled. "When a person with power loses something," she began, "the world usually assumes it will be returned because power has a way of arranging that for itself. This week, I lost more than a phone. I lost the excuse of not knowing what has been happening inside my own company." No one moved. She spoke plainly then. No polished corporate music in her sentences. No fog. She described the night in the rain. She described Daniel returning the phone without opening it. She described the video clip and the accusation and the suspension. Then the screens behind her came alive with security footage. There was Daniel at the curb, bending to pick up the device. There was his hand turning it over and immediately setting the screen down against his palm. There was Lily trotting beside him beneath the rain. There was Adrian, later, shaping the scene before anyone asked what had truly happened. Murmurs spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. Helena lifted a hand, and the murmurs died. "The device was never breached," she said. "The employee who returned it did exactly what honor looks like when no one is clapping." She let that rest. Confidential materials were leaked from another source. Our audit has identified that source. Adrian stood abruptly. "I want counsel present before this becomes theater." Helena turned toward him, and for the first time all afternoon, her wealth looked less like polish and more like force. "This stopped being theater when you turned a working father into a shield for your own misconduct." The next minutes passed with the brutal efficiency of truth finally given a microphone. Compliance officers stepped forward. Adrian's credentials were revoked before he reached the aisle. The press, sensing blood and justice and the rare alignment of both, captured every second. A man who had spoken in the language of image was undone by evidence. A man who had tried to define worth by posture and access discovered that records do not bow. Then Helena looked toward Daniel. He did not rise until Lily touched his sleeve. He stood awkwardly, as if even vindication belonged to rooms other people practiced entering. The auditorium turned toward him, hundreds of faces now carrying a different silence from the one in the lobby. This one held recognition, regret, some shame, some admiration. None of it changed the rent. None of it erased what happened. But it changed the air. "Mr. Reyes," Helena said, her voice gentler now. "Your suspension is lifted, effective immediately. More importantly, the company is correcting what should never have required your suffering to reveal." She announced a new hardship fund for employees facing medical crises, child care emergencies, and transportation gaps on late shifts. She announced a paid night childcare room in the tower, open within 60 days. She announced the reinstatement and review of all denied aid requests from the last 2 years. Then she announced that Daniel Reyes would be offered a salaried role as Director of Facilities Care and Employee Support Logistics. Benefits, housing assistance, regular hours, and the authority to help build the systems people like Adrian had treated as decorative. The room applauded then. Not the shallow applause of galas, the fuller kind, uneven and human. Daniel stood still inside it. Practical justice often arrives looking smaller than pain, but it is heavier. It pays the pharmacy. It turns the heat back on. It gives a child back her field trip. It lets grief stop negotiating with overdue notices. Helena stepped down from the podium and crossed to him in front of everyone. "I also owe you an apology," she said. Daniel shook his head once, because habits of survival die slowly. "You don't owe me more than the truth." "Yes," Helena said, "I do." She glanced at Lily, who stared back with the grave courage of children who have seen adults fail and repair in the same week. Helena noticed the paper heart in the lunchbox pocket. "What does it say?" she asked. Lily held it up. "For brave pockets." Helena smiled then, but there was water in her eyes. "Would you mind if we put that on the wall of the new childcare room? To remind everyone what this place is supposed to protect?" Lily looked at her father first. Daniel nodded. "Okay," Lily whispered. "But only if you spell my mom's name right when you name the fund." The room inhaled. "Your mom's name?" Helena asked softly. "Elena," Lily said. "She was brave too." Helena closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, as if receiving a lesson from somewhere beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. When she opened them again, the decision had already settled. "Then it will be called the Elena Reyes Fund." Months later, on a winter morning washed clean by pale sunlight, Daniel walked Lily into the tower through the same revolving doors that had once watched him be shamed. The lobby still smelled faintly of lilies and polished stone, but something in it had changed. Near the elevators, a glass-framed sign directed employees toward the Elena Reyes childcare room. Inside, warm lamps glowed over shelves of books, small coats hung in neat rows, and on the far wall, framed in simple wood, sat a wrinkled red paper heart cut from a child's worksheet. "For brave pockets."